All right, 131, folks. Let's talk about the rest of Unit 4. Let's talk about Chapter 8. Um, Real quick, war is awful terrible, never any good, but the War of 1812 was actually good. Um, yeah, I know. I said the exact opposite of what I just said, but that's okay. Because here's the thing. The War of 1812 forces us to be more self-reliant. That's what I was hitting at in the last one. War of 1812, we cut off trade. We cut off importation. We cut off exportation. Again, as you probably hear me say more than once, war is good for business, and the War of 1812 was particularly good for business, at least for American businesses, because we quit buying French, we quit buying British. Those are the two manufacturers. What we do get is we get the advent of what is the Industrial Revolution here, where it was hinting at, okay, it now gets here. It forces us to establish our own market economy. It forces us to establish our own manufacturing. It forces us to become more self-sufficient. Before the War of 1812, we were reliant on the British for textiles. We grew a lot of cotton, yeah. We sold a lot of cotton, but we didn't make stuff. The actual making of textiles was secondary because Britain had the know-how. And so what this does is it forces us to become a better economy. It forces us to take time to establish these things that we need. We're going to take a page out of a book from Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations. And yeah, I know the title's longer, but that's okay. We're just going to go with The Wealth of Nations. And why this is important is he talks about in The Wealth of Nations that anybody can manufacture anything. Any country can make anything, but the idea is, should it? The other thing he talks about with this is the division of resources and division of labor. This introduction about the introduction of resources and labor and division of all this allows us to create a manufacturing atmosphere. And this manufacturing atmosphere, this age of industry is going to be about change. So we see the introduction of steam engines. With steam engines, we start looking at steamboats. We start looking at Robert Fulton. All right, we start looking at creating an actual workable engine that allows us to create steamboats. Now we can go ahead and ship not only down the river as we've been doing, but now we can take steamboats and ship up the river. We can use these steamboats and create other technologies. One of those things that comes in is going to be the Erie Canal with the steamboats that come in and the power that comes in. We start looking at other expansion along the way. Since we're talking about cotton, one of the things that comes up at this particular point is a guy named Eli Whitney. Eli Whitney does not invent the cotton gin. No, he innovates the cotton gin. He says, look, this is what you've got. Eli Whitney is in the South visiting friends, and he's noticing this machine they use, this gin. It's for taking the seeds out of the cotton. He says, gosh, it would be so much easier to do this and this and this and this and this. And what he does is he changes the cotton gin in such a way that, one or two workers can now get 10 times the amount of stuff done. What he does is he creates a new form of cotton gin that industrializes the South and the cotton in such a way that they can grow more cotton because now one or two slaves can process 10 times the amount of cotton. Where he was trying to make the slave life easier to get stuff done, he actually makes slavery profitable again. And so there's a lot of stuff that happens at this particular point where we start to look at the transition. The book talks about slaves being sold south. It talks about a lot of things happening. There's some changes, and the changes are because we start to look at production. We start to look at industrial revolution. We start to look at creating mass production. We also start to look at a transition in shipping, a transition in communication. F.B. Morse, Samuel Morse comes into this particular point. We start to look at the telegraph system. We start to look at the spread west because we purchase Louisiana Territory. So we decide that we're actually going to move people to Louisiana Territory, that people want to move west and spread out. In order to move west and spread out, they've got to make sure that it's a functional change. So we're starting to look at other ways of planting, other ways of farming. We look at the introduction that, hey, this is where good old John Deere comes in, because he creates something called the Singing Plow, which is actually a steel plow. It's called the Singing Plow because it cuts through that tough tundra of the prairie states. It cuts through those tough weeds as easy as a song. We start to look at the production of those. We start to look at a guy named Cyrus McCormick, who creates what's called mechanical reaper. Not only now can we plant more because we can plow more, but now we have a way of harvesting more. There's a lot of things happening, folks, a lot of transitions happening thanks to this industrial revolution. Another one comes in is a guy named Francis Cabot Lowell. Francis Cabot Lowell creates a Lowell system. He creates a mill town, folks. If you are at all in the South, south of the United States, chances are you have run into a mill town or two, because I know I used to work in a cotton mill in Kannapolis, North Carolina, and the entire town was centered around the big mill in the middle, and then about the 14 different mills that were built around the area, all to support that one main mill. He creates a version where he can hire young women, have them come and work there. They can work in mill houses. They can go to the mill school. They can do all the things for the mill, around the mill, and he can control what goes on in daily life to get better production. We're also looking at something called the American system, which feeds into all this, and you can thank, again, Eli Whitney for that, because he talks about standardizing production of parts of machinery, standardized production, so that you can manufacture part 0.37526B, and it will be the same each time, so you don't have to personally custom manufacture parts. We're also starting to look at the introduction of political machinery, and it's this political machinery and these political parties by the political machinery that start to control American politics, that start to control the politics of how people get elected and how they don't get elected. What else comes in? I know the book talks a little bit about Horace Mann. Horace Mann is an interesting guy because Horace Mann is going to introduce the concept of normal schools. He's going to introduce the concept of perhaps that certain levels of schooling should be free and open to everybody. That perhaps a general schooling of people is a good idea because they need a certain amount of education, a certain amount of intelligence to be valuable members of the system. Valuable members of the system in the fact that they can read and write to a certain level so they can produce and they can manufacture without having to be so closely watched. Folks, after the War of 1812, we change how we do economics. We're going to go ahead and put some importation agreements in at this particular point that restrict what we're going to import. The idea being is we want to grow American factories. This growth of American factories, these importation deals that we start to make, are protectionism. We're going to go ahead and protect these growing American industries. The idea of protecting growing American industries by creating a new tax system to foster the growth of them is a bad idea. If they compete and survive because they compete, that's great. What happens here is we start to look at the growth of sectionalism. The idea being is we're going to go ahead and foster the growth of certain companies, certain areas in such a way that, yes, it's going to help them out, but the people that have to buy from them that would normally buy imports instead, it's going to start costing them more money. And so this is going to be the very beginning of the seeds of what becomes the Civil War. So I'm going to leave you off here, and I will catch you in Unit 5.